mastering questions. So I want you to participate in this lesson. I want you not only to answer questions in the comments, but actually speak out loud, practice saying these questions, because that's going to help you improve your overall speaking fluency. And if that is one of your goals, please subscribe, turn on notifications. That way I can become your teacher. My name is Wes. The channel is Interactive English. It's all about trying to help you reach your fluency goals. And we are going to cover a wide variety of questions. And the last thing I want to tell you is this: if this is your first time here, please let me know, write your name, tell me where you're from in the comments or in the chat, because I love hearing from you. Also, if you would like to download the lesson notes, you can click on the link in the description and join our email community, and I will send them to you. You'll have access to them. If you are already a part of our email community, check your inbox, because I've already sent them to you, or you will be getting them very shortly. So let's begin with some simple questions, because we use questions all the time in just everyday conversation. And this is my first question for you, which, if you ask these different questions, say them out loud, I think you'll be able to tell. So do you think the following questions have a rising or falling intonation? What do you think? Let me know. And again, you can practice saying them out loud if you think that helps you determine this, because when it comes to your speaking fluency, especially when we're talking about asking questions, the way you ask them is important. And intonation is also important, because that's going to provide you a little bit of extra information. So this, I'll be honest, it's a little bit of a trick question, because the answer is both. But generally speaking, yes/no questions really have a rising intonation. So let me give you some more specifics. So if you said rising, I think, yes, that is the correct answer, because you're going to use a rising intonation when the answer is unknown. You're asking a question, you don't know what the answer is, which is why you're asking the question, so you're going to have that rising intonation. Does that make sense? You're really confused. You don't know if it makes sense to the other person. Are you hungry? Do you have a pen? So say those questions out loud with me and really try to rise that, really that higher pitch at the end, and that intonation is going to be rising. Does that make sense? You kind of have to get into character for this. You're genuinely asking someone, are you hungry? And you can hear that rising intonation. Do you have a pen? So this is important, because yes/no questions, you can hear that rising intonation. However, I told you it was a little bit of a trick question, because these same questions may also have a falling intonation. But this would only be used when you know the answer already, or you think you know the answer. So for example, maybe you're asking for confirmation. Does that make sense? So in this case, I use that a lot in the classroom. You're saying, does that make kind of goes up and then it's going to fall with sense. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Often I will explain things like I just did, and then I will ask students for confirmation. Did you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So it's not necessarily that rising intonation, but I'm asking for confirmation. The same way that next question right there, if I know that the other person is hungry, I would say, are you hungry? Sometimes I know my little girl, she's upset. It's because she hasn't eaten anything, and I'll just ask her, oh, are you hungry? Are you hungry? And same with that last question. If I know that you probably have a pen, but I need one. Do you have a pen? Do you have a pen? Not as often you're going to ask questions like this, because again, the slight nuance would be if you know the answer or you're asking for confirmation, you'll then have that falling intonation with these yes/no questions. But generally speaking, you're asking the question because you don't know the answer, in which case you're going to have that rising intonation. So the next thing I want to say about this is, well, let's have a look at the structure. Very quick grammar. I know that you are familiar with this, but there's a reason why I'm presenting it to you now. So you have the verb, the subject, and other information. This is when the yes/no question is the verb to be. Are you okay? If the main verb is any other verb, we're going to use the auxiliary verb do or does, or in the past tense, did. Does that make sense? Auxiliary verb, followed by the subject, followed by the main verb, and then you have that other information. I'm going to come back to this with a question in just a little bit. But let's stay on yes/no questions. And I want to talk to you about another type of yes/no questions, which are statement questions. We can use statements, which are declarative sentences, to ask yes/no questions. In writing, you know this because you see that question mark at the end of the statement. However, when you're speaking, once again, the context is important, and you have to either listen for the intonation of the person speaking, or if you are speaking, you got to use that intonation so that it's clear exactly what it is that you're asking, that you are saying a statement, but you're asking it as a question. So with that rising intonation, again, the answer is unknown, like I'm surprised. You're from Chicago? You're from Chicago? Again, with those last two syllables, it's like we go up, Chicago, and you really hear that rising intonation. You're from Chicago? Again, if the answer is known, or I suspect that, oh, okay, you're from Chicago, and you hear that falling intonation, you're from Chicago. So once again, the distinction is really whether or not the answer is unknown and you're genuinely asking this person because you want to know the answer, or if you think you really know what the answer is, maybe you've seen this person, you've heard that they're from this city, and I say, oh yeah, I know you. You're from Chicago. The next thing that I want to look at, is practicing. Let's practice these. I want you to say these with me, and this is a little bit of a listen and repeat. So I'm going to say number one. Again, I'm telling you whether it's rising, and just say it right after me. So number one, she's 30 years old? She's 30 years old? Number two, let's use that falling intonation. We know the answer, but we're still using this statement question. You went to my school. Like, yeah, I recognize you. You went to my school. Number three, that rising intonation. That's your father? That's your father? And number four, again, you see someone, you think you know the answer. You live in my building. Yeah, I've seen you around here before. You live in my building. All right, so let's move on. So we talked about those yes/no questions. If you're participating, which is what this is all about, let me know in the chat, in the comments. You can just write one word, speaking. And that tells me you're actually practicing these sentences, these questions, and trying to use the correct intonation. Because once again, if you're able to do this, it's about improving your fluency and just making it easier to communicate clearly. So let's look at some open-ended questions. Very, very common questions. We use these questions because we want more than just a simple yes or no. So these are statements that require a longer response. My question for you is, what are the 6 main question words? And once I show you this, you'll know what I'm talking about. But as far as these open-ended questions what are the 6 main question words? Write your answers in the chat or in the comments. That's what this is all about. It's about interactive English. It's about participating in the lesson. So the question words that I'm referring to are the WH question words in general. However, there's one that does not begin with a WH. So I'm talking about who, what, where, when, why, how. And you notice that how does not begin with the WH, but these are the most common question words, and we're going to put these at the beginning of our open-ended questions. So excellent, Mohammed, Lali, excellent, perfect. So the next thing that I want to look at is, continuing to think about these question words. I told you the most common ones: who, what, where, when, why, how. What if you are trying to ask someone and you want them to make a choice? Which question word are you going to use? Write your answer in the chat, in the comments, participate. You're talking about a question in which someone needs to make a choice. Which word would you use? Okay, so the answer, excellent, is which. I was laughing because I just asked you, which word would you use? Which one should I choose? Great job, Esty, Lali, Angela, Nellie, great. The next one, again, which is often used. I would say it's not considered part of those primary 6 ones: who, what, where, when, why, how. Now, what if we're talking about possession? There's that which, making a choice. Which question word would you use? I'm not going to give you some options, but you're talking about possession, ownership. And you want to know, I don't want to keep talking. I feel like I'm going to accidentally say the word, but think about possession and you want to ask a question. Which word are you going to use at the beginning of the statement, at the beginning of the question? So the answer is whose. Well done, Esty, Harry Carpenter, Lali, Ava, Sedge. Awesome, you guys got it. Angela, Julia, great. So we use whose when we want to know, okay, this belongs to you or him or her. Whose pen is this? And then finally, frequency. How are you going to ask about that? The one little hint that I'll give you, which I don't even really think I need to give you a hint, is that this is a phrase. There are 2 words that you're going to use. But if you're asking about frequency, you're going to use this phrase at the beginning, and this is common. We talk about this a lot. This is good little review, kind of testing your knowledge, because we use questions all the time. And when we want to know about the frequency of something, we're going to ask how often. Well done, Katerina, Angela, Lali, Nellie, great. Ava, Sedja, how often do you go hiking? I'm asking you about the frequency of this activity. How often? So there are other words out there, but again, when you're starting out those open-ended questions, who, what, where, when, why, how, which, whose, how often, how much, how many, there are a lot of different ways to begin those questions. The one thing I want to point out real quickly, and again, I want you to practice your pronunciation. This is all about helping you speak naturally, easily. So when saying the did you, we're talking about the past in this case. Assimilation may occur in order to connect did and you, because the final d sound may blend together with the beginning y sound in you, and it's going to sound a little like j. It's almost like we're taking a j and we're putting it in between those 2 words. It's not something you need to force. If you just say them, it's going to naturally happen. So instead of what did you, and I'm just trying to pronounce those individual words, it's going to sound like What did you? What did you? And you can hear that j sound. Say it with me. What did you? Where did you? How did you? Why did you? And this is a great place to start if you're trying to speak more fluently, use connected speech, and take that did you construction, because we often ask other people questions in the past tense. What did you do yesterday? Where did you go last night? How did you find this? Why did you do that? And you can hear that j, but just when you focus on that did you, and instead of pronouncing the words individually, you can blend that d and y together, and you get that slight j, something to think about. Again, I want you to I trust that you are saying these out loud and practicing with me, because that's what it's all about. So let's move on to structure. I've given you some words that make up this question right here. I want you to, just write the question. Write the question in the chat. Write the question in the comments. I don't think this is too difficult, but you'll see in a moment where I'm going with this, where I'm trying to take you. So we have 6 words. Of course, the first word, want to start with that WH question word, what? And we're going to follow it with, does he eat for lunch? What does he eat for lunch? Well done, Eva, Lali, Esti, Harry. I don't think this is too difficult right now, but you'll see where I'm going in just a moment. So we have the question word, followed by the auxiliary verb, followed by the subject, and then the main verb, and then the other information. Look at these questions down here. They follow that same structure. When did she leave? Where do you live? How often do you brush your teeth? So if I wanted to give you, let's stay on structure. I want you to be careful. So here is another sentence. I'll go ahead and say that this is not a question, but I want you to unscramble these words and see if you can create a sentence, not a question, and put them in order. So remember the general question was, what does he eat for lunch? You're asking this to someone else. What does he eat for lunch? And this may be the response. And there's a reason why I'm telling you to be careful, because this is a mistake that I commonly hear in spoken English. And I know that when you're having a back and forth conversation, it's difficult to think of these small little grammar things that are going on. But it's still important, and it's necessary to practice. So the answer, well done, is right here. I don't know what he eats for lunch. Great job, Moath, Manuel, Sia, excellent, Juliana. So what I want to point out is the WH clause. So I've been talking to you about structure, and the main thing when it comes to these questions is really that the subject and the verb are inverted. Typically, you think of a simple sentence in English, you have subject, verb, object. But when you're asking a question, that subject and verb are going to get switched around. But this, once again, is not a question. We have the subject, followed by the auxiliary verb, don't, followed by our main verb, no. We're going to follow that with a WH clause. This is really a noun clause, but when we're talking about clauses which also have a subject and a verb, we are not going to change those around. You're going to follow the structure of a sentence, subject, verb, object. We're going to start with our WH word, follow it with the subject, what, he, followed by the main verb, eats, and then followed by that other information. And I told you, and I imagine you probably think about your own conversations that you've had if you feel like this has ever happened to you. I think this is something that's really common, because when people are speaking and they say these WH words, their brains are so connected to those questions, and you're switching the subject and the verb. I would often hear something like, I don't know what, I don't, I'm trying to even switch it back now. I don't know what does he eat for lunch? Because again, people would then ask it as the question. So I don't know, what does he eat for lunch? And I would then try to tell somebody, look, that's a WH clause. It's not going to follow the question structure in which you'll use that auxiliary verb. We're just going to follow the WH verb, subject. I don't know what he eats for lunch. So this is something just to be careful of, mostly, I mean, in your writing, but also when you're having a conversation. Like I said, it's a very common mistake, and it's a little more complex because I know that many people's brains are wired for switching that subject and verb, or they're thinking about those questions. Politeness, very important, especially culturally. I think you guys know this. Do you want something to drink? Can you rewrite that question? Or how would you ask this question in a more polite manner? Because especially you're traveling to another country, you meet people for the first time, there are so many instances in which you want to try and be more polite. And what I would always tell people is, if you're unsure, always try to be a little more polite. And that's what you should use. Holly, yes, beer, please. I think it's about that time. So, do you want something to drink? If you want to make this a little more polite, and there's different ways to do this, but the way I would change it is, would you like something to drink? Instead of want, we're going to change that to would. Would you like something to drink? I think you guys got it. Eshti, Harry, nice. Ava, very common. You got to just know your audience. If you're just with a friend and you say, hey, do you want something to drink? That's perfectly okay. But depending on the situation you're in, it's always good to be polite, especially if you're unsure. The other thing I'd like to point out, notice how I'm saying it. Would you like something to drink? That final D in would, that D sound, once again, we can blend it with that beginning Y in you. Would you? Would you? You can hear that slight J sound. Say the question, say it right after me. Would you like something to drink? Okay, hopefully you blending those sounds together using assimilation, that J, would you? All right, where's the toilet? Okay, common question. You go out to a restaurant and you would ask somebody who works there, hey, where's the toilet? But if you want to be a little more polite, and not necessarily that you have to do this at a restaurant, but maybe you go over to a friend's house, somebody's home, and maybe you don't know the person really well. In that situation, I would suggest that you try to be a little more polite. So instead of just saying, hey, where's the toilet? How could you ask this question in a more polite way? So before, we had the word want, and I said use would. It makes it a little more polite. In this case, we're talking about, where something is, like the ability. Instead of saying, like, again, we could say, can you tell me where the toilet is? Instead of can, I want you to use could. So once again, there's different ways to ask this. Where's the toilet? Can you tell me where the toilet is? But you want to be more polite. Could you? Could you please tell me where the toilet is? Awesome. Great job, Avatina, Seja, Yusuf. Wow, you guys are rocking it. You guys got some good typing skills as well. So could you please tell me where the toilet is? Could you, again, blending it together. Notice I'm trying to follow up on these. Would you, could you? There's nothing wrong with saying could you and saying both words. That's perfectly fine. You should never feel like you have to speak a certain way. But as far as using connected speech, the reason people do this is because it's actually easier. Over time, you develop these this way of speaking, it's actually going to be easier. Could you please tell me where the toilet is? The other word that I want to highlight when it comes to politeness is the word please. Very important. And it's a word that I think when you're starting to learn English, it's a word that I think sometimes people forget. Depending on the country and culture that you're coming from, it may be used in certain contexts or situations that it may not be applied in places like the US or the UK, but it's always good to use. The other thing that I want to point out, again, I'm trying to build on this as we go through this. Notice that second part. Could you please tell me something? This is a WH clause. So remember, with the clause, we're going to have the subject followed by the verb. The toilet is. Could you please tell me where the toilet is? I haven't looked. I saw a couple of responses in the chat where, once again, people would maintain that question structure. Could you please tell me where is the toilet? So be very careful when it comes to that. Instead of where is the toilet, this is a WH clause. So you're going to have the WH word followed by the subject, followed by the verb, and then any other information. Could you please tell me where the toilet is? Okay, so again, like I'm trying to build on this, and hopefully all of this makes sense. But when it comes to politeness, basically what we're doing is we're taking a direct question, which can be less polite, like, hey, where's the toilet? And turning it into an indirect question, which then allows us to make the question softer. It's not as demanding. It doesn't sound as aggressive. And that's really what's involved when you want to make these questions more polite. Where's the toilet? Hey, could you please tell me where the toilet is? So essentially that's what's going on. We're changing these direct questions to an indirect question. But when it comes to politeness, know your audience. If you're talking with a friend or a family member, or you're out in public at a restaurant, again, you're at a restaurant, I think it's okay to say, hey, where's the toilet? But if you want to be more polite, you could use could you, or if, again, you're at somebody's home and you don't really know them and you want to be more polite, definitely, yeah, could you please tell me where the toilet is? Then I want you to, since you guys are so quick writing these responses in the comments, in the chat, I want you to write a tag question. And you can write a question with either a positive tag or a negative tag. It doesn't matter. We're going to have a look at both of them. But we're kind of moving into our next type of question and talking about tag questions. So in the chat, in the comments, write any tag question, either with a positive tag or negative tag. Again, it's all just getting you thinking about these different types of questions. We started with the easiest, the yes, no. I wanted to follow up on that with those statement questions because you're using that rising and falling intonation, and then moving into those open-ended questions, which, again, I don't think it's not the most difficult or complex grammar or speaking in the world, because this is just so common. But there are these slight little nuances. Okay, so I have you like pizza, don't you? Nice. Angela, she got a promotion at work, didn't she? Perfect. What a beautiful day in Madrid, isn't it? Okay, nice. So you get I think many of you get the idea of a question tag. So her name is Layla, isn't it? You say her name is Layla, isn't it? Okay. Are you going to be ready for the weekend? Are you ready for the weekend? Aren't you? Wes is American, isn't he? Okay. You don't mind, do you? Okay. Good. There's a lot of great answers. What I wanted to point out is I said you could use a positive or negative tag. When you have a positive statement, again, you're just using a statement, and then you're going to follow that with a negative tag. You lock the door. You're making a statement, but then following it with that question, didn't you? And that's the negative. Didn't you? You lock the door, didn't you? Your grandparents live here, don't they? If we're talking about a negative statement, and the statement, in this case, we're using don't or didn't. Then we're going to use a positive tag. And that's just the thing you got to keep in mind. But once again, I feel like many of you have studied this, have learned this, and you're comfortable and familiar with it. But the negative statements, she didn't see the movie, did she? The jury didn't find him guilty, did they? So positive statement, negative tag. Negative statement, positive tag. And there you have those tag questions. Now, my next question for you is to identify this type of question. What do you call a question that is asked in order to create a dramatic effect or to make a point rather than to get an answer? There is a name for this type of question, and I think it's a pretty common type of question, and it's one that people use even in speaking, and they'll use this. I'll tell you what I mean. You may hear this TV shows, movies. This is a type of question. What do you call it? You're just trying to create this dramatic effect. You're not really expecting an answer. You don't really need an answer, and that's the key part of this. So let me give you the answer. We call a question S, and I just realized my own grammar's sake, there should be a question mark at the end of that question. All right, so I'm talking about a rhetorical question. I saw some answers in there. Ava, SD, nice. Angela. So when you're asking a rhetorical question, you're saying it to someone for effect or just trying to emphasize or point something out, and you really don't expect or need the other person to respond. So sometimes, like, somebody's frustrated. Hey, can't you do anything right? You're not really anticipating that a person responds to that with an answer. You're just frustrated and you say this rhetorical question. Or, hey, what's not to like? Who doesn't want to save the planet? Of course, you're not expecting somebody to answer that. Or again, in a situation, hey, do you want to lose the match? Maybe you're trying to motivate someone, like, to keep going. Do you want to lose the match? So we're talking about these rhetorical questions. And the reason why I said you may hear this is that sometimes in a movie or TV show, somebody would ask a rhetorical question, and it becomes a little bit of a joke because the person's getting ready to answer, and they say, hey, that's a rhetorical question. Okay, you don't need to answer. It's a rhetorical question. So in a way, if you're in a movie or TV show is creating this situation, they may be doing it for effect, for humor. Somebody's asking a rhetorical question, the other person doesn't really understand that, and they try to answer it, and then they're told, hey, that's a rhetorical question. I don't want you to answer that. So something to keep in mind, but these are questions that are not meant to be answered, and you use it for effect. A lot of times people end up using it in frustration. Like I said, that first example, can't you do anything right? Now, what about this type of question right here? So we just talked about a rhetorical question. What about this type of question? Maybe you can't see that, so I'll tell you what it says. It's a little bit of a comic strip about Adam and Eve. So she says, be honest, Adam, do these leaves make me look fat? And then he says, just a little. So that question that Eve is asking, be honest, Alan, do these leaves make me look fat? What type of question would that be? How would you identify that question right there? So it's not a rhetorical question. I think, she's genuinely asking that question, anticipating a response, but the response can get people in trouble. That's all I'll say. So you could say, I see the trick question. You could say it's a trick question, but there's another phrase, another term that I'm looking for instead of a trick question, because sometimes trick questions will also, they get you in trouble. So she's asking this, do you think these leaves make me look fat? And it's putting him in a position to, well, no matter how he answers it, it's a little uncomfortable. It's a problem. It's kind of a little bit of a trap, maybe. And when you have a question like that, you could refer to it as a loaded question. And this is a question that's containing, as I just mentioned, a hidden trap or an implication. So let me give you an example of an implication. If somebody said, hey, do you still drive that ugly car? If you answer yes or no, that's a yes-no question. I'm implying that the car is ugly, and you're admitting that the car is ugly. So that would be a loaded question, one that you probably don't want to answer because it's like, hey, my car is not ugly. But if I say, hey, do you still drive that ugly car? I'm implying that it's ugly, and no matter how you answer it, you're also then agreeing that it's ugly. So that would be a loaded question. Or if somebody, and this is probably one that I've actually gotten before, why aren't you married yet? And it's a loaded question because the person that is asking it really is basically implying that, okay, you should be married. If I'm asking you this question, hey, you should be married, and no matter what you say, it's not going to change my opinion. So even if somebody says, well, I haven't found the right person, or I've been busy, or I was doing all these things over the years, it's not really going to matter. It's a trap. If somebody says, hey, why aren't you married yet? But this is a loaded question that I think many people may end up getting, especially when they're younger, in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And then the final one, do you actually believe your own lies? Once again, no matter how you answer, you're admitting that you tell lies. And that's a loaded question that is basically trapping you into admitting that, yes, you tell a lot of lies. Do you actually believe your own lies? So Lolly, actually, somebody pointed out, good question, Lolly. No, that's a typo. It should say, why aren't you married yet? That is a typo. That is my mistake. Thank you for pointing that out. I go through all these slides like multiple times, but it's one of those things that when you end up looking at your own work, your brain just doesn't catch some of these slight little grammar mistakes or any kind of written mistakes. Like I said, I forgot to add a question mark to the other question. So hopefully that makes sense. And this is another phrase you may hear when somebody asks you something, and you may hear somebody respond like, wow, that's a loaded question. I don't want to answer that. It's a loaded question. It's a question that's a trap, or it's basically trying to get you to admit something or concede something based on what they're implying. And then this last type of question that I want to ask you about. This is a meme. Think about a courtroom. You were forced to wear a leash, right? We can say that question statement, that rising intonation. If we don't know the answer, you were forced to wear a leash. Or, again, you could say it with that falling, like we know the answer. You were forced to wear a leash. Either one, it's just a different way of asking that yes-no question. But the lawyer, who is this dog right here, says, objection. The witness. What type of question is that? And again, I'm trying to use these words that I think you may come across in movies, TV shows. You could even use them in conversations, talking about a rhetorical question or a loaded question, or even this. This is probably a little more specific to a courtroom and that environment, which is why I said objection, the witness. Which word would you use to complete the sentence right there? So in this case, we're talking about leading. Objection, leading the witness. If you watch any type of movie or TV show that involves a courtroom and the lawyers are going back and forth, somebody's being questioned, this is this is a statement somebody might say, objection, leading the witness, and then the judge would say overruled or sustained. So listen for that next time that you may be watching any TV show or movie that is in a courtroom, leading. But a leading question is basically the way it sounds. You're encouraging the respondent to answer in a certain way. And these are common questions when you're seeking agreement and you ask questions that are leading. So I mentioned times that you would hear this would be in a courtroom. Other times, which are a little more subtle, if you watch the news, CNN, Fox News, it doesn't matter. And maybe let's say the host or whoever the host is interviewing someone that they agree with or someone that supports their point of view. They end up asking these leading questions because they know that this person supports their opinion on, you could talk about a range of topics, climate change, abortion, whatever. But if you have an interviewer and they're interviewing someone who kind of necessarily agrees with what they're trying to say, the interviewer may ask these leading questions, mostly because they just want to agree with each other. So they lead the person into responding a certain way or just into agreeing with them. These are leading questions. So if you're watching any news interview, like I said, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, BBC, doesn't matter, and somebody's interviewing someone, try to identify some of those questions. It depends on who's being interviewed, but they will ask leading questions, definitely. And you will certainly hear that in a courtroom, leading the witness. So these are the different question types that we went through today. Started out with the most common ones, those yes-no questions, those statement questions, as well as those open-ended questions. We talked about changing questions, making them more polite, very important, very useful, tag questions, and then some of those other different questions types that you may actually come across in conversation. There are others as well, but I think those are three that are useful because you could ask somebody a rhetorical question, and if they start to answer, tell them, hey, that was a rhetorical question. I don't want you to answer. It was a rhetorical question. Or somebody asks you something and you don't want to answer. It's a trap. You say, well, that's a loaded question. I'm not going to answer that. Or even, again, I don't know if you work as a lawyer or you're in a courtroom or you're watching something, you will hear that word leading. Sometimes lawyers will ask people leading questions, and they shouldn't be doing that. So I hope that with all these lessons, I just hope that you learned something new, and I'm going to keep putting these lessons together. This one had a little bit of everything as far as grammar, pronunciation, talking about assimilation, practicing your intonation, as well as a little bit of vocabulary, because if you are not familiar with these words like rhetorical or loaded or leading, then these are good words to try to put in your word bank. They're a little more advanced, they're more specific, but when talking about questions, you may come across them or you may even use them. So thank you guys very much for being here today. Let me give some quick shout outs. Angela, Lolly, great to see you. Jackie, Tez, Nellie, Harry, Angela. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Remember, if you want to get those lesson notes, check out that link in the chat. Or if you're already a part of our community, I will send them